Hi, it's Tony again, and we're back on the bench. And this morning, we're going to be doing a reassembly of a Penn Squidder Model 140 that, as you can see, I've got completely taken apart in various pieces. I had a couple of Penn Squidder projects here recently where I needed to do some part swapping and acquire some parts and loosen up some parts and various different things. And so I've got a separate video on the disassembly of a different Squidder than this one, but same model, same components, and this is only going to be for the reassembly. So I've already done pretty much all the prep work for the purposes of saving time in this video, but as you can see, we've got our frame all assembled here, and it's all shined up with really shiny pieces here, and we've got all of our screws kind of snugged up here on the handle ring side, and then we've got the non-handle side here pretty much all ready to go and whatnot. And then we've got our bridge assembly and our drag washers and gear set and all that. So we're just going to dive in here. So the first thing I like to do here is I want to make sure that I hit up my lube points here with some lube or some oil. And I get a lot of questions sometimes about what to use with ball bearings. Well, I don't think that there's any specific rules. As long as you're using oils or greases or lubes that are designed for fishing reels, I think that's probably the first and foremost important part. I'm actually going to use this old school tube of lube because I have a whole bunch of them that I'm just kind of using up here slowly. And so I'm going to get a little bit of lube here in the handle side bearing that's tucked away down there. You don't need to completely flood it, but you just want to get enough of it on there. And then I also want to hit up my eccentric roller here because these are moving parts here. I just want to touch a little bit of lube there. Okay, and so now we've got two pinion yoke springs here that go into place like so, and then we've got our actual pinion yoke and our pinion gear, and I like to apply some lube here too on this yoke because all these metal pieces are moving parts and they do need to be properly lubed, as well as the gear here, of course. I'll just do a little bit there. I do actually like the Penn lube. I miss it. It's too bad that Penn doesn't really offer it anymore because it's kind of the best in between the oils and the greases that are offered out there. So now we're going to place our pinion yoke on top of those springs like so. And then we're going to take our eccentric jack, we're going to put that on top and snap that into position, hopefully without all of this kind of crumbling apart, which does have a tendency to happen sometimes. Just go slow if you're doing this. So now you should be able to push down on that pinion gear here. Now at this point, there's a series of different things that need to happen here. I'm just going to take my finger off of this for the moment, but we've got our bridge assembly here, and we've got a fiber washer, and that's going to go on first. Now I've already taken off the bridge sleeve here, and I actually did that in a separate video, so you can check that out if you want to know how to take off that bridge sleeve, and it's pretty standard for most of these vintage Penn reels. But note that this fiber washer, the old one actually cracked apart on me here, and you can see it's in bits and pieces here now. That's not an uncommon problem, so I had to seek out another one for that. But we got our main gear. It goes on top like so, and then we've got our washer stack here. And these are actually leather washers, but they're still quite usable. So we're just going to go in sequence here. I cleaned these off really good. So we got a leather washer, we got a metal washer, our second leather washer, keyed washer. Got to make sure that's in the right spot there. Then we got our last leather washer and our last metal washer, and then we got our spring washer that goes on top to apply some tension. Okay, so that's your drag stack right there, and what we're going to do is we're just going to apply a little little bit of lube here on the main gear. This main gear cleaned up really nice. This is not an original gear. The original gear would have been a high strengthened bronze. It probably would have been more of like a silverish color, I think. But either way, this is a very clean gear set here, so that's great. Okay, so now we're pretty much ready to assemble these pieces, and all that's left is the dog and the dog spring and our 4 screws here. And what I like to do here is I like to hit up these threads, of course, with a little bead of lube here. I'm actually starting to run out of that, so I'm actually going to use some Penn precision oil on this, which is great. Just do a little bead of oil on those threads right there. Okay, so now we're at the point where we can get ready to insert this, but before we do that, you have your anti-reverse lever right here that goes back and forth, and that moves this roller right here. I like to hit up a little bead of oil on this as well. I just want to point that out before we actually do this. So just a little bead of oil right there, and let that kind of work its way in there, because that is a moving part and it has a tendency to get kind of stiff. And so just let that work its way in there like so. And you can do that before or after you start doing all of this stuff. I'm just kind of going along in a sequence that's natural for me. So we're going to take our bridge assembly and turn it upside down. We're going to apply pressure to that pinion gear, and we're basically just going to insert our main gear, and then we're going to roll our bridge around on top of these pieces here like so. And then you're going to get to this point here where you really need to stop, and you've got your dog and your dog spring. Now note that the dog spring is actually attached to the dog itself on the Squidder. I believe the Squidder and the Jigmaster 500, that was a standard set. Whereas with a lot of other conventional reels that Penn offered, that wasn't the case. Now this is where it gets tricky, because you need to be able to have this spring hitting this little nub right here where my finger's pointed, but you got to get your fully threaded screw through the hole of the dog, and that can be a little challenging here. So we're going to do this real slowly here so we can try to get this lined up here. But you got to get that through the hole, and then you got to push down your dog spring back basically so that it applies pressure to the teeth, and it should look something like that eventually, where it's all compressed together. Now at this point, you kind of need to back down that screw so that it's flat, and then just slowly roll your bridge back around, and then once you hear that snap of your pinion gear snapping back up, that's usually good. And then you should be able to turn your screw at least a couple of turns. I would not tighten it up by any means, just turn it. You want to make sure that this is functioning correctly, and as you can see, it's sounding very healthy and very good. So we're going to continue with our other screws and get those back into position. But yeah, this bridge assembly is pretty standard for a lot of Penn reels that have been made over the years. Now I'm mostly talking vintage. Like I said, you can find this assembly on the Squidders, Surfmasters, Jigmasters, Silver Beaches, even the Coronados. Those are all take-apart models, but then also like all the Long Beach models of the same era, and not to mention all the Senators and Special Senators and Baymasters and Beachmasters, just all those models. This bridge assembly is pretty standard. The one thing that the Squidder was unique for, though, was to have ball bearings, stainless steel ball bearings on both sides, as well as air brake fins on the spool, which made it very desirable for casting, for surf casting. So we're just going to gently snug up these bridge screws here, and hopefully, yeah, this is a very, very smooth operator right now. So what I like to do now is I'm just going to deploy a little bit more lube here on top of the eccentric jack and also the pinion gear here, just to get just a little bit more on there, because all these parts are going to move at some point. Again, you don't want to overdo it by any means, but you want enough in there that it's going to be hitting the areas that it needs to hit. Okay, so that's the handle side assembly, and now we're pretty much ready to put this back into position here. One thing I am going to do is, you've got your take apart thumb screw thread right here. I just want to put a little dab of oil right there. This has a tendency to get very, very rusted sometimes, that thread, and I find it's very helpful to just keep it lubed up with a little bead of oil. And then we should be able to turn our thumb screw back into place. Sometimes it can be a little tight. If it feels too tight, don't try to force it. But I can see it popping out right there, and so that's all good. Okay, so now we're pretty much in the home stretch here. I'm just gonna kind of clean off some of this excess lube that's on here so it doesn't go oozing all over the place. But yeah, the Squidder is a great model. They made this before 1941, and it lasted all the way up until about 2006. And there really hasn't been any changes to the there hasn't been any real changes to this design per se, or any improvements on the Squidder. There is the 145 Squidder and the 146s, but those are smaller chassis. But there really hasn't been much improvement to this model over the years. So it's definitely lasted a long time. So we've got a spool, a plastic spool, and it happens to have some old line on it that I'm going to have to take off eventually too. But for right now, we're just going to get it back in there. So I like to take a little steel wool to the shaft on these spools here and just clean off any contaminants that don't belong there. And then we're just going to take our lube here, and we're going to try to get a little bead of lube in these points here. Again, you don't have to get carried away, just a little bit. And also the teeth here, the clicker teeth, just want to get a little bit on there as well, like so. And then you should be able to insert your spool. But as you can see here, these are the air brake fins, and this was very helpful if you were surf casting. This was considered state-of-the-art in its time, and in the early 1940s, there was nothing like this that existed really, that at least Penn offered. And so so this was a big deal if you were surf casting and you wanted to try to avoid backlash, and you didn't have to worry about having as much of an educated thumb as you did with a lot of the other traditional conventional models per se. So that was definitely a big feature of this reel. So at this point, we're going to just flip this on its side here, and we're just going to do a bead of oil on all these threads right here, so that we don't have any problems getting our screws back into position. So we've got our side plate here, with the surf fishermen casting out and the seagulls in the background on the water. Very pretty design, and that pretty much stayed that way throughout their entire run too. They didn't have a blank face plate. They didn't change it up with anything else like they've done with a lot of other models. This stayed this way, but they offered. The Penn came in a lot of different colors over the years. It started with black, and then eventually it went to a darker maroon red color, and then this is a slightly brighter red color that they came out with, and then eventually they went straight back to the black and nothing else. And so just to give a little history of how that's been over the years. So we're just going to line up our holes here. So we've got our screws, of course, and we're just going to lay these out. So we should have 4 longer screws and then 2 shorter screws. And once again, we're going to take our oil here, and we're just going to do these little beads of oil on these threads here. Don't need to get carried away with that though. Just a little bead is fine. Just having a little bead in the right area is better than having too much. And I just need to kind of slowly rotate this ring because it's just slightly out of alignment. It's hard to see here, but it's it just needs to be turned like the tiniest hair. So I'm just gonna pry up this ring here ever so slightly. Get this to line up right, hopefully. Okay. I think that's better. I hope it is. I'll try that again. But yeah, if you were a surf fisherman, this was the reel that you wanted. Now they also offered the Surfmaster amongst some other models. The Silver Beach was an earlier model, but not quite as wide and didn't have quite the same features as the Squidder. And that went the same for the Surfmaster. The Surfmaster is usually confused with the Squidder, but the Surfmaster does not have the air brake fins on the spool. It doesn't have the anti-reverse lever, and you know, those are probably the biggest differences. And then of course the ball bearings the Surfmaster doesn't have. So those 3 things are the biggest differences. The Surfmaster just has bushings per se, but the Surfmaster is also a great tool to have in the workbox too. But it does share a lot of the same chassis parts, minus this outer ring on this one side that we're getting screws put into right now. But yeah, the Squidder was top of the line though for squidding and for surf casting on a conventional reel, which is probably why it lasted for so long. So I'm just going to gently snug up these screws. I don't want to tighten them up too much. Never want to over tighten these. You don't want to develop hairline cracks in your reel, in your rings or your plates or whatever. And there's just no need to do that. So okay. So I'm just going to start snugging these up, kind of go back and forth here so I can equally distribute this tension, so to speak. Just kind of go down the line here. Okay, so that looks good there. Now I'm going to put this down here for a moment. Now this is the non-handle side bearing, and I've actually been having it soak in some CRC Power Lube just to kind of bite through any excess grease or anything that's built up down in there. The bearing itself is actually pretty clean, and I know that it's working right. I've recently run into a frozen bearing on another Squidder, which was quite stubborn and difficult to free up and loosen up. But I mean, this part right here, Penn does not make this anymore, but I think there's 1 or 2 other manufacturers that make this same bearing, but they're not officially Penn bearings. And you know, it's about a $20 part right there, you know. So you know, if you have extras of these kicking around and you happen to have a Squidder, you might want to hang on to those pieces and parts. So, but what we're going to do here is we're just going to apply a little bead of lube in here, and that's really all we need to do. And then I'm just going to apply a little thread of oil right here on these threads, because this has a tendency to be a little difficult to turn on these models, and so I just want to make sure that that's going to go in nice, which it certainly is. So that's great. So we're gonna cut the extra line off of this here, but you can see that it's spinning real nicely there already, so that's great. Okay, so last remaining pieces, we got our sleeve that we're going to put on, and then I'm just going to put a little dab of lube here on these threads for our drag star wheel. And I kind of shined up some of these pieces as well earlier. And if you'd like to know how to do that, I've got a separate video on cleaning your chrome and polishing vintage reels, so you can check that out on my YouTube. So you just want to make sure that this wheel is all the way down so that you can actually get your handle completely on this sleeve here. I like to do a little bead of lube or oil in there as well for the handle nut. So we'll put our handle on, stock handle, set that in place. We'll put our handle nut on. And of course you will notice that there's all these grease points, all these lube points on a lot of these old traditional reels, but I have to tell you, that was a great idea, I think, on Penn's part, but there really is no substitute for doing this maintenance like what we're doing right now. Like it's actually more in the cleaning sometimes, and just as much with the lubing. So you know, that's just something to note, that you know, you can spend all the time you want trying to get in there, you know, with these tubes and stuff like that, but it's not going to be a substitute for actually cleaning and maintaining the reel, and you know, getting the lube in those areas where it really does need to be. So just one little thing, but I like to do a little bead of lube on that little hole, and a little set screw hole, and then we're just gonna snug that up gently. And then we're just going to clean this off here, and we're going to try it out and see how it performs. And the only other thing that I also like to do a lot of the time is I'll just hit up a little bead of oil right here on the handle shaft right here. Just kind of let that work its way in there, like so. Just help free up any dried up grease or oil that's in there. So okay, so we've got loose drag here for starters, and so let's go to free spool first. So that's really nice free spool. Those bearings are just really smooth, and that's great. And all my line is starting to come across the frame posts here. That's fine. I have to take that off. Normally I would take that off, but I wanted to get this all pieced back together. So we're going to tighten up our drag here, snug that up, and it feels like it's definitely holding. And again, you can upgrade to an HT100 kit if you got leather drags and you're finding that they're not holding as good as you want them to. Try our clicker out though real quick. Nice strong clicker. So I'd say that's all good to go. We'll try out our anti-reverse. That's working fine. So there you have it. That's the Penn Squidder Model 140, all serviced up and ready to go. So thanks again for watching. This is Tony with Back on the Bench. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. And we'll see you next time.